Sorry, now we sorry. And I said, I don't care if that's the deal that Netflix signed. It's not the deal that I'm going to sign.
Okay, Shirin, here's the thing. We've seen all these different deals that are happening with Netflix now getting into live stream as well. You personally have worked on over 100 deals yourself with YouTube NFL Sunday Ticket, with the YouTube and Disney renewal that we just saw, and also the NBA nationwide deal as well. Whenever I see these big figures that come through, my question is always, who is getting a lot of that money, right? How does that process work? Who's getting the chunk of that?
So a good example and an easy one for me to talk to is the 2014 national TV deals, which I worked on when I worked at the league. And in that case, that money gets paid directly to the league. But then the question is, of course, what happens to it? So like the NFL, the NBA does equal revenue sharing among all of the teams. So all 30 teams get 1/30th of that money each year that gets paid to the league. And then that money kind of filters into a system that's governed by the collective bargaining agreement that ultimately affects player salaries. So as many of you know, when there's a new TV deal, the first season of it, you'll see an increase in the salary cap. So there's something called basketball related income under the CBA with the NBA and their players. And so that pool of money, which includes national TV fees, that is what ultimately gets kind of like pushed through the machine to get you the salary cap numbers that then each of the teams are operating under. So you can think of the money that comes into the league as kind of covering three basic buckets. It will cover league operations, right? So some of the money, the league needs to pay people like me and pay for leases and keep the lights on and pay for the costs of, NBA All-Star Weekend and all of that other good stuff. So there's some money, anytime revenue is coming into the league that is going to go towards league operations. And then there's the revenue sharing pool that goes to the teams themselves. But again, as the teams think about how they can spend that money, their 1/30th, if you're the NBA portion of that money, and how that affects player salaries, then you look to the collective bargaining agreement and that definition of basketball related income and how that filters in and then ultimately hits the salary cap.
And then from that deal that kind of happens, the players' cut, if you will, is not really based on that deal. It's okay, we know that we got this deal, and now we're negotiating a separate thing with the NFLPA or whatever. I assume that's like a whole separate aspect to it.
Well, it is in the sense that the collective bargaining agreements themselves are separately negotiated. But as you know, the collective bargaining agreements with any of the major leagues are on their own timelines, whether they're 3-year deals, 5-year deals, 7-year deals. So to be clear, there isn't like a separate negotiation that is happening after, say, a large media rights deal has been signed. Look, the Players Association is going to be well aware of how long the existing media rights deals are, and therefore when more money may get pumped into the system when the deals renew. But the majority of the negotiations are happening, actually all of the negotiations are happening at the time that the new collective bargaining agreement is signed. And so at that point, the players are negotiating what goes into the pool of basketball related income. And then obviously what percentage of that pool ultimately flows down to the players via the salary cap. And many of you probably were paying attention to the recent labor negotiations with the WNBA, right?
Exactly.
So that was a good example of where that percentage was very important to that players union and those players because they wanted a bigger piece of the pie in terms of the league's overall revenue. So, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say agents knew that as well because they made sure to negotiate the contract to end when the bargaining agreement ended so that whatever the new bracket was, they could get involved. Of course, the rookies got maybe shafted a little bit, but I think that's a great aspect to it as well. And you have the MLB lockout that's coming up possibly as well. So that's good. But did you want to finish your point that you're making? Sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, no, that's okay. It's just that the idea is what mattered to the WNBA players was the definition of basketball related income as well as the percentage that ultimately flowed down to them through their salaries. But again, there's sort of a mismatch in timing in the sense that those CBA negotiations are not happening necessarily like right after a national TV deal. But to your point, we know when the collective bargaining agreements are up for renewal, and we know when the national media deals are up for renewal. Now, on that latter point, I would also drop a footnote that people are probably well aware of that the NFL is looking to negotiate their media deals early. I mean, similarly, when I worked on the national TV deals for the NBA in 2014, those existing deals actually didn't expire until 2016. So those we also opened up early. So the idea that you know exactly when media rights deals are going to be negotiated is sort of yes and no. That being said, what generally happens is the existing term of a media deal will play out. So when we did those deals in 2014, we kept the 2-year stub of the deal that had been signed in 2008 and ran through 2016 in place, and then the new deal kicked in after that. But I say that because this idea of sort of the timing being a known quantity isn't always the case, but you at least know what the duration of the contracts themselves are.
Now, from all the deals that you've worked on, is there one that's kind of like your favorite one where you're like, you know what, that was a lot of fun. I'm proud of that. 10 out of 10 would do it again.
Yeah, probably the YouTube Sunday Ticket deal, for a couple of reasons. I think of any one deal I've done, is probably the most transformative, right? Most of you know that Sunday Ticket had sort of been originated on DirecTV. It was a product that was only available on DirecTV for decades. And the fact that it was moving to a streamer, and frankly, a streamer like YouTube/Google, who you knew was going to invest in product innovation and really kind of change the way that that product interacted with fans and delivered them content and created, I would argue, stickier, richer opportunities to engage with, what is arguably the most premium live content. So that deal was, I think, the most transformative of any one deal that I've worked on. I've been doing these deals, doing kind of streaming deals before we even called them streaming deals, going back to like 2010. And the idea that Sunday Ticket would end up on a streaming platform, was heresy for a really long time. So that one, and the other footnote for that one is that deal came together really, really quickly. I think we negotiated that deal, papered it, signed it in about a month, which for a deal of that complexity, that size, that importance to both of the parties is insanely fast.
And is that just because they just wanted to make the deal happen and they found a compromise of structure and, compensation? Or was it because the season was coming up, hey, we just got it done? Like, were people just easy to work with to make that happen?
I would say it was a little bit more the latter, which is, the thing about sports, obviously, is there's real seasonality. And so sometimes deals really have to happen by a specific window. And again, those of you who pay any attention to this may remember that Sunday Ticket had been in the market for a while. Like, it was clear that the DirecTV deal was going to end and that there wasn't going to be a renewal of it. And the NFL had been out shopping those rights in the market for a while, including coupling them with the NFL media properties, which, recently now obviously have gone to ESPN, but at a time they were trying to couple those together. And even the NFL had announced a deal with Apple about a year before our deal, that Apple was going to take the rights to Sunday Ticket. And then the announcement came before the agreements were actually signed. And ultimately that deal didn't happen. So I think there was motivation because of timing, right? The league obviously doesn't want to have a season without Sunday Ticket in the market. I think YouTube felt like it was a really great opportunity. And so it was as much a timing issue, but I will say these very large media deals, 90% of the work often gets done in the last 5% of the time, because it is really when you're going to get serious about negotiation, because there is always a seasonal aspect to it. People can only let this go for so long. And, if you're YouTube and you're taking on a new property like this, you need to market it. You need to figure out all the logistics of, actually taking the streams in, ingesting them, making sure that the product for the end user is of the quality you need it to be. That's a lot of testing and engineering work. And so I think there were timing issues on both sides, right? The league wanted to announce a new partner. YouTube wanted to make sure that they had time to market, particularly important leading up into the Super Bowl, which is a great time to market Sunday Ticket for the next season. So there were a lot of timing issues on both sides that were driving people to really focus on the deal terms that matter most, right?
Okay, so that one took a month. Then what's the longest deal that you've worked on?
Yeah. So I talked about the fact that I've been doing streaming deals before we called them streaming deals, dating back to 2010. So a lot of those early deals I did when I worked at the NBA and worked a lot with League Pass. So when I got to the league in 2008, League Pass was only available as a browser-based product or through your MVPD, your cable satellite telco provider for your pay TV bundle. And so one of the first things I was tasked to do when I got to the league was think about the distribution cross-platform. So back then it was a combination of actual hardware. So some of you may or may not remember Boxy. We did deals with the initial version of the Apple TV hardware. We were actually one of, I think it was 8 pre-installed apps. And so what we would do is we would work with these platforms, like Yahoo had a connected TV platform. So we would do deals with these either platforms or specific devices, also like a Samsung connected TV, where we would put an NBA app on the device, and then that was a gateway to sell and authenticate a League Pass subscription. And so now you had a streaming kind of digital version of NBA League Pass. So one of those deals, this is a very long precursor to my longest deal, Sony PlayStation. So we had done a deal with Xbox, and at the time Xbox and Sony PlayStation were obviously the 2 biggest gaming platforms, and they were looking to get more sports and entertainment and live content to kind of control more of the living room. And because I mentioned before, these deals are seasonal, and League Pass in particular is incredibly seasonal. Any of you who've ever had a subscription will be familiar with, there's the early bird pricing, and then there's the regular season pricing, and then pricing drops through the course of the season, down to, race to the playoffs in like March and early April. But if you don't get but the majority of those subscriptions for any of these out of market products are coming in those very early days, like pre-season and early season. So if you don't get a deal done at that time, it's just not worth doing it. And it took us 3 seasons to get that Sony PlayStation done. And these were new deals for the league. They were new deals for the platforms and these new connected devices. And at the time, the market maker, to the extent there was one, was Netflix. And this was, very early in Netflix's digital journey too. Again, those of you will remember that they used to just send us in the mail DVDs. And so Sony was like, okay, well, here's the deal we can offer you. And it was not a good deal from the league's perspective economically. And so I said, no. And they said, well, that's the deal that Netflix signed. And I said, I don't care if that's the deal that Netflix signed. It's not the deal that I'm going to sign. And obviously Netflix and League Pass are 2 very different products, very different business models. And again, early in all of our evolutions doing these kinds of deals, and I'm quite sure that the deal that Netflix signed back then, it would not be the deal that they would have today. Yeah. But I kept saying no. So they put the deal on the table the first season. I said no. We negotiated for a while. The window closed. And I said, come back to me next year. They came back the next year with basically the same deal with a little changes around the edges. I said no again. So finally, the 3rd time they came back around, and they clearly understood that I was not going to do the same deal. And we were finally able to come to economic terms and launch the NBA app, and then therefore that kind of gateway to League Pass. But it took 3 seasons, so kind of like 2.5 years to get that deal done. And, it turned out to be a super important deal for us, and that strategy in general at the league for us to make League Pass more accessible on digital platforms was huge. Yeah. But we were all just trying to figure out what the economics of those relationships were going to be because they were brand new.
I can just only imagine them reaching out to your inbox a year later, be like, hey, wanted to circle back on this idea. And see if we can make something happen. And then next time they're like, hey, 3rd time's a charm, possibly. But we actually did, we had a bit of a closing dinner at CES that year to celebrate, where we all got in a room because a lot of those folks were in LA, the league's in New York, and we had done, most of it just on calls. And this was obviously before video calls. So it was literally just on the phone. So it was nice to kind of sit down and break bread in person. I love it. Okay. Now we go from cord cutting, right? Where everyone was like, oh, we're just going to stream whatever we want, whether that's YouTube or Netflix for $9.99. I think my bill is now $25.99. Last night, I went ahead and took a look at all the subscription that I pay for. It's Netflix, it's Hulu, HBO Max, Paramount Plus. I had no clue. I don't even know what I watched there.
Soccer.
Yeah. Well, there's Apple TV. Thank you for reminding me of Apple TV with MLS, right? My point is, it now takes 17 different subscriptions to watch 6 NFL playoff games. Have we gone too far with this whole let's slice up as many times as we can to get the biggest cut?
Yeah, I think there are different ways to think about it. There's the way to think about it from the league perspective, the job I used to do, and this was absolutely, a David Stern-ism, which is slicing the salami as thin as you can and thinking about how you can monetize these rights in as efficient a manner as possible, and efficient, obviously standing in for getting the most money. And as rights holders, the leagues absolutely should be doing that. And look, that money that, again, as we talked about, that gets pumped into the system, that goes to the teams, that ultimately ends up in player pockets, makes for a better product. So they're incentivized to do that. I think there's sort of the corollary, which you're speaking about, which is kind of the end of the pay TV bundle and the cord cutting. And now, the idea was, you cut the cord and you have all this choice, and now you just get the content you want. But it turns out that content is spread, in a lot of different platforms. And I do think there's often this pendulum that swings back and forth between kind of bundling and unbundling, and kind of that consumer choice versus consumer value. And I do think that there is potentially an appetite for more bundling. And I think where you're seeing it is kind of in half steps is a lot of the bundling that's being done by the SVOD services themselves. So Disney's really great at this, right? Disney's obviously offering you bundles with their own products, like Hulu, Disney Plus, ESPN Unlimited, but they're also bundling, HBO Max, and doing, I think they've got their Fox One deal, right? So in some ways, that is almost recreating a pay TV bundle. I think one of the biggest issues and why so many people cut the cord was that not only did the pay TV bundles feel expensive, but oftentimes the customer service and the hardware of it didn't feel consumer friendly. And I'm obviously a bit of a homer when it comes to YouTube and YouTube TV, because I work with them a lot and I think it's an exceptionally great product. But I think subscribers to YouTube TV have a different relationship with YouTube TV than, say, a subscriber to Time Warner had to the Time Warner cable. I was a Time Warner cable customer in New York City, because that was really the only choice at the time. And so I think there are a bunch of different things that are kind of all going on in the ecosystem. I think it was people who found the limits of a facilities-based pay TV bundle, right? And so as we move more to non-facilities-based options, like YouTube TV, like Hulu, like Fubo, those are richer, better products. And I think in some ways it's making us long for the idea that you had one fee you paid each month to get all of your content. A couple of years ago in particular, when I think people weren't quite as sophisticated in how they were thinking about the bundling and unbundling of content as consumers, I would do a thought experiment. I'd say, hey, what if I told you could have one platform? It had all of your content on it. It was a unified electronic programming guide. So the discoverability, by the way, sorry, my dog is joining us. Discoverability of the content, super unified. You could do search and actually find all of the content that you had a subscription to. And maybe you'd have to pay a little extra money for, some kind of a pay-per-view event, or, a movie that had just been released. But by and large, all of your content was included. How much would you pay for that? Would you pay $200 a month for that? And a lot of people would say yes. And I think, and I was like, okay, well, that was the pay TV bundle. But if you now say that, but look, it's a YouTube TV product, or it's another non-facilities based product, and there are all these bells and whistles, and they're really trying to get to the discovery piece better, improving search. I think there's a question about whether some people would prefer to go back to that. But it's hard now. Content is so fragmented, not just sports content, right? We know that about entertainment content as well. And this idea of choice and sort of the individual subscriptions, and what do you lose when you consolidate everything and take all of the content? And yeah, it's going to be more expensive, but do you end up kind of making up for that, either because it turns out you have 17 subscriptions with all told are $400 a month. Yeah. But I think that search and discovery piece of the fragmentation has been, for many consumers of sports content as well as entertainment content, the biggest barrier. And like Google will tell you, their most searched terms in the sports space are where to watch. Where do I watch? And then fill in the blank, whatever match it is or game that you're looking for. And that's obviously a big problem. And I think one of the things that I think a lot about is that kind of search and discovery piece. And not just for the content that you want, but if you are a producer of content or a licensor of live content rights, you want people to be watching. So it's not just the search piece, it's also the discoverability piece. And I think that is one of the benefits of a bundled product, like a truly bundled product, like a pay TV bundle. And so I think there's an appetite for that potentially.
The appetite, in my opinion, and you're still in the industry, so I want to make it very clear these are my opinions, I think is changing. And here's an example I want to talk about. There's two things. One, there's the TBPN, the podcast, the show, the live stream that got bought out by OpenAI. A lot of rumors on how much it got paid for. anywhere from 6, 7, 9 figures, whatever the amount may be. What's interesting to me, one, is that now you have influencers that have more influence over actors and actresses, possibly depending on the scenario. But this graphic I want to focus on is how their live stream only had 7K viewers. Now, this is obviously very different than broadcast national TV and all that. It's just streaming. But then the clip views is astronomically more. And the reason I bring this up is because you have experience in short form content that you've worked on in the past as well. And it seems like it's only going to grow because people have that dopamine hit of, okay, I got what I wanted to see. Okay, cool. I'm moving. I'm doom scrolling, and I don't have the patience to sit there and watch unless, it's something that's really, truly entertaining to me.
Yeah. And look, I think there's been a demographic shift around that as well, right? We know that younger fans and younger viewers are less likely to sit in front of a large screen and watch a full game, right? And so these clips become super, super important, but also potentially destabilizing for the media ecosystem. And I think one of the things that everyone is spending a lot of time thinking about is that balance between, do you watch a full live game, or would you rather watch the highlight clips in not real time, but as close to real time as possible? And, I did work for a while for a startup called Buzzer. And that was a lot of what they were trying to solve, was how do you reach the fans who often are a younger demographic, who are often mobile first, who aren't necessarily going to sit in front of a large screen, presumably the living room screen, and watch a full length game through, say, a pay TV provider or a broadcaster. And so the idea of Buzzer was hyper-personalized notifications, based on your fandom, which could have been a team, it could have been a sport, it could have been a geography, it could have been a player. And we'd say, hey, we think something's going on in this game that you care about. And you can drop into the broadcast through a micropayment, or if it's a subscription you have, you authenticate. And to me, that was powerful because it solves the kind of discoverability and search issue that we talked about. It potentially creates a new rights class other than kind of long form live content that, like the Disneys and the Paramounts are licensing. And it's reaching an audience that is younger and mobile first. And unfortunately, I think Buzzer was a little too soon, but I think the idea of it is right. And I think any rights holder wants to figure out a way to monetize that short form content, which has, kind of been co-opted by social platforms and isn't necessarily, the leagues aren't maybe making, or the rights holders aren't making as much money from that content as they could, given that it is driving so much engagement, right? So I think that's an interesting balance as we move forward in the next couple of years and we think about these rights deals and how we think about different classes of rights. That short form, I think, needs to be one that we can potentially consider monetizing separately from long form. I mean, right now, if you are a partner of a league on the broadcast or streaming side, you are getting short form rights in addition to long form. And that's awesome. Like if you're ESPN, you're getting access to highlight clips that you can use on, ESPN.com. You can use it on your social channels. You can use it on SportsCenter. But that's a very specific way of licensing it. And I think how you think about it in kind of social platforms that are independent of the broadcasters and the streamers is an important way to kind of think about the evolution of rights. And, we're kind of in the middle of that now.
We have that, but now you also have AI rights. I don't know if there have been any deals that included AI rights or not. I don't have the patience to read a 400-page document, but you tell me that's got to be another windfall that these leagues are going to have is, okay, hey, we'll give you AI rights to do X, Y, Z with this player, these things, these voices, whatever the case may be.
So I think it's important to kind of think about AI rights in different buckets. So I think what is arguably a really interesting new rights class and monetization opportunity for leagues is actually the data for purposes of training, right? Training data. And that's, obviously there's been litigation around that with like the New York Times and certain AI platforms. And in general, people who are out scraping the web. Library content for sports is, not as available online. If you want to see it, a 1960s NBA game, right? That's not generally available online, but it's all been digitized and part of the NBA's archive. And so I think there are potentially deals to be done around training data for the games themselves. So I think that's an interesting monetization opportunity. When you talk about it in the context of using AI to create player avatars, or, what it actually looks like for if AI is generating what looks like a basketball game or a football game.
Like that SpongeBob. Was it the NFL that did that?
They did SpongeBob. Yeah. So, and we should definitely talk about alt casts too. But I think when you're talking about actual like player name, image, likeness, again, collective bargaining agreement is going to govern that. So the players have not given the league the right to license AI data in such a way that it would include their individual name, image, likeness. Now, there's something called a group player license, which governs like broadcast rights. But even then, the leagues and the rights holders obviously are rightly very concerned about the players' rights to name, image, likeness. And then if you layer on top of that biometric data, health data, anything else that might, get sucked up into an AI or machine learning model. So there's a lot to unpack there. And I think for that reason, you haven't seen a lot of deals in this space. And I haven't been involved in any negotiated deals that specifically governed AI rights. And in fact, what we often spend more time dealing with is people who want to be really clear that AI is carved out of a deal. But I think there's really interesting work to be done there. And then going back to your point about like the SpongeBob of it, is AI can be incredibly helpful as a tool to create these alt casts, right? So you license third-party IP like SpongeBob, and you use AI to essentially, create the graphics that overlays the players and now turns them into Patrick or whomever else from the SpongeBob ecosystem. I think I only know 2 characters from SpongeBob.
So how can you forget Squidward? Come on.
Oh, Squidward. Sorry, Squidward. You're right. I know 3. So I think where AI to me in the near term is very interesting in live sports is as a production tool, right? And so that can be a production tool for an alt cast like SpongeBob. It can be a production tool for doing a better job with localizing language for live sporting events, right? I do genuinely believe you want native speakers to actually call a game. So I'm not necessarily saying you want to do just AI generated voices in the local language, but for things like graphics packages, there are sort of efficiencies that AI creates. And I would argue that in this country, we could do a lot more, particularly Spanish language, broadcast, but I think other languages as well. I mean, we have such a diverse country with speakers of many languages, and we ask most of them to watch sports in English.
There's Banana Ball that now has a Spanish broadcaster, right? So that's the huge one.
Yeah, well. Yeah, it's great. And more, I think local rights, as local rights are moving to over the air, I think a lot of times those rights can include, there's a client I had who owned stations in markets, was licensing over the air rights from an NBA team, and had both Telemundo affiliates and English language affiliates. And they're like, hey, we'll produce 2 games for you. We'll produce the native, Spanish language on Telemundo, again, with actual, talent calling the game in Spanish, plus the full graphics package. And on our other affiliate, we will do the English language version. And, teams rightly are excited about that. They want to build their fan bases. And if the broadcasters or streamers or other programming partners are willing to do that and leverage AI to help bring the costs down, I'm hoping we will see more and more, not only alt casts, but alternate language casts as well.
Yeah, and you have streamers in terms of like Mr. Beast, who's obviously a YouTuber, who will have the same video dubbed in different languages to attract the individuals in that nation as well. So that's something else. Speaking of Mr. Beast and influencers as well, and altcast, you're also seeing now streamers that'll watch the game with their fans. I believe the NBA did this. I saw it at least a few months ago. Maybe it's been happening more than that as well. Is that kind of like the next wave and the future of things where, hey, the teenagers or Gen Z, I don't know what letters it is, but they're not going to watch TV, right? But yeah, all of them, they're not going to watch TV, but they will watch their favorite streamer watch the game and add commentary and type in the chat and feel more involved with the broadcast than just watching it on their flat screen TV. Now you're seeing where people want to go ahead and watch the game with their favorite streamers so that they can feel more integrated into the broadcast versus just watching something on their flat screen TV.
Yeah, no, and I think you've seen that, like different versions of that. So, Twitch often would have Twitch streamers. And again, they didn't have the rights to say the underlying broadcast. And so they would just be talking, and you knew they were looking at the broadcast, but the broadcast audio and video wouldn't have been available on the screen to them. But seeing that was getting a lot of traction, platforms like Twitch and like YouTube have actually been going out and trying to get these rights licensed. So the NFL is a good example. I mean, they did some early deals with some very specific Twitch streamers where they actually gave them like legitimate access to the feed of the game, so that experience could include the actual broadcast itself with the Twitch streamers' commentary over it. More recently, YouTube has done what they call Watch With, and they did it for that Brazil game, the preseason game they did last fall, again with the NFL. And so, more and more what they're trying to do is work with the leagues and the programmers themselves to get pre-approved influencers to do a Watch With experience, where again, the broadcaster and or the league have specifically granted the rights for the stream itself, either with or without the audio, to be available to this influencer, this YouTuber, and then the YouTube does commentary. So like the iHeartSpeed was one of the Watch With iterations that they did back with the NFL, for the preseason game last year from Brazil. And his numbers were great. And, the idea there is a different demographic, right? To your point, these are younger fans who may or may not sit in front of a television and watch a full game or a full quarter or 10 minutes or however long it is, but they may well be happy to do it, in a co-streaming environment, this kind of Watch With experience with, iHeartSpeed.
Yeah, it's incredible to see it. And I definitely do think that that's kind of going to continue being the way that individual, because again, you can watch it on your phone, you can type your comments or whatever the case is. It's just more interactive. And again, more things are happening sooner and sooner. You've been in all these rooms where decisions are being made, deals are being made. I don't know how many other women are in those rooms as well. I don't know how many brown individuals are in those rooms as well. What's something that you would tell the folks watching if they want to be experiencing the things that you're experiencing, and something that they might be able to kind of take away with?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And, I've been doing this work since about 2008, and I think things continue to get better. But yes, I am often the only woman in the room. I'm often the only person of color in the room. It's not always true. I mean, like, I keep talking about YouTube. I really enjoy working with them. They have really diverse deal teams. I did a deal with them not long ago where I think every single person on the deal team was a woman, which was amazing, and the first time that had ever happened in my career. And, I think we tend to get the advice as women, as people of color, that you just have to be twice as good and you just have to be better. And look, there's some truth to that. But I think when we talk about things in that way, we're externalizing it, and we're actually sort of looking for validation from other people to say like, oh yeah, you actually are that good, and so we're going to invite you in the room. And I wonder if we do ourselves a disservice a little bit by externalizing that. And it reminds me of something. My very first day of law school, I was in my civil procedure class that at the time was taught by the dean of the law school. And he sort of gave us this pep talk our first day of law school. It was basically like, look, you're all going to be fine. You made it this far. You're all going to get jobs. It's all good. Just be nice to each other, which was amazing in and of itself. But he said that the thing to be true to ourselves about, and that had gotten us as far as it had, was what he called an internal barometer of excellence. And I think about this phrase often. And maybe what I would say to, brown people in rooms where they're the only brown person, and women in rooms where they're the only woman in the room, is instead of thinking about like whether this room sees me as better or competent or deserving of being in the room, to look internally and just really operate based on your own internal barometer of excellence. Like, are you doing good work? Do you feel proud of the work you're doing? Like, I'm glad you asked me about what was the deal I was most proud of. Like, I think it's important, as much as we know that other people have to often invite us into these rooms, and so I don't want to neglect that dynamic. I would, though, maybe like to recast it a little bit so that we're doing this good work for ourselves. And my thesis is, if we're doing this good work for ourselves, if we're meeting our own internal barometer of excellence, that we will get invited to those rooms, and we will be relevant in these conversations, and people will see and appreciate what we have to, the value that we add. But I'd rather start with us thinking about just doing good work for ourselves that makes us proud. Because I think we give too much power to other people when we talk about, oh, you just have to be twice as good or you just have to be better. Yes, but then we're allowing someone else to decide if we're better. And I'd rather that we kind of take control of that.
Yeah, I love what you said, and also just kind of be nice to each other and kind to each other, because so many times, especially in my professional career and otherwise, it's always been the networking and the kindness where opportunities may come up and whatever the case is, right? It's like everyone has the skill set after a certain point, like the few top 5, top 10 people, everyone's got the skill set, the accolades, everyone's going to be fine and get the job done. But like, who do you enjoy breaking bread with? Who do you enjoy working with, where if you get a Slack notification from them, you're not like, oh my God, now what? Right?
No,
So that's a terrible experience to have.
yeah, no, it's so important. And I do think that kindness matters. I mean, it matters because, again, it's part of hopefully our internal barometer of excellence, which is, yeah, to be kind to people, not because there's a transactional value in kindness, but just to be kind to people because it's the right thing to do. But you are also right that if you build a reputation for not only being good at your work, but that somebody wants to work with. I mean, I've recently transitioned in my career and I'm working more on the consulting side, in part so that I can choose the projects that I work on and who I get to work with. But I think, my decades of working in the industry and trying to be kind and thoughtful wherever I can will benefit me as a consultant, right? Because people are like, oh yeah, I like working with Shirin, she's great. And that's what we all want to have, like, as our mark in these rooms and in these conversations and in these industries, because it does matter and you want to like the people that you work with.
Yeah. I was going to ask you to kind of wrap things up. You're saying no to certain things to make room for things that you want to do. One of them is being a co-founder of Verily Advisors with 2 of your other colleagues as well. Why did you want to go down this route?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very fortunate to have had a super rich career that I'm very proud of, and have done, some very cool things in sports and even in digital media. Before that, I practiced in the digital media space for 10 years before I got to sports. And, as I get older, there's the work that I really enjoy doing and the work that to me feels like it's groundbreaking, and we're pushing boundaries around what the consumer and fan experience looks like. And I feel really grateful that kind of sports found me. I wasn't actually intending to work in sports early in my career. And turns out I love working in sports. And part of the reason I love working in sports is people are willing to try things in sports because you have a built-in audience, because you have fandom. And so I want to focus on the deals and the companies and the transactions and the products that really are trying to do something new to continue to keep sports relevant as how we consume content change, as demographics change. And so for me, going out on my own with a couple friends, and so, Verily Advisors is sort of sports and entertainment. I obviously am the sports part of it. My 2 other partners go deeper on the entertainment side, although a lot of the deals I do obviously include entertainment, like the Disney deal I worked on for YouTube last fall. That was across the Disney portfolio. It wasn't just ESPN or ESPN Unlimited. And so for me, it was about to have some control over the things that I work on, and going back to, I just want to work with people I like on cool shit. And so the easiest way to do that seemed to be to go out on my own in terms of helping to co-found Verily Advisors with my 2 friends.
Awesome. Well, Shirin, I appreciate your time. This has been great to kind of get some insights on what happens in those rooms. Obviously, certain stories, we can't hear. Totally get that. But this has been very great, insightful. And I think the next deal that I see happen, I might just shoot you a text and say, was this you? See if that's something that you worked on as well. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, so happy to join you all. And thanks for the thoughtful questions.